Hello, my name is Rachael Helm, and I'm starting this podcast called Afternoon Bloom, and I'm super happy that you hopped on board and started listening. I'm very excited to be doing this. I never thought the day would come, but if you know me personally, you know that I love to talk, and this is the natural next progression of my life. So I'm very excited to be doing this. Um, Also, if you know me, you know that coffee amps me up more than anything else, and not just for the caffeine, like this shit is my jam. And if you were to get stuck in a conversation with me about coffee, you know that it just goes on and on and on, way longer than you probably liked. So that's kind of my goal for this podcast is to put all of that into one space and um, my main goal for this podcast is to create a space where hopefully you can take something away every episode and learn something new about coffee. I've been a coffee roaster for 2 years now, and an occasional barista as well. So I kind of play a few different. I'm trying to say wear different hats, but it's just going in the wrong direction. Um, so yeah, I've been working in coffee for a while, and I kind of see how um, people don't even know what a coffee roaster is. Like, they just assume I'm a barista. So there's this huge lack of knowledge from the consumer's point of view and the specialty coffee world's kind of point of view. And I just kind of want to mesh those two and really create a space where this is an introduction to coffee. I think, unfortunately, a lot of coffee podcasts out there are just really specific to people who are already in the industry and like deep in the industry. So they kind of brand themselves as these intro to coffee, and I'm listening and I've been in coffee for a long time. And I just think they're talking about things that kind of get really confusing, and it's all about this new advanced technology, and there's great conversations to be had, but I just think there is a huge gap of information. Like, we'll have people come into the roastery and I'll tell them this sliver of information, like something just slips off my tongue and they're floored. And that's when I realized, oh my God, we really need a conversation about this, because there's just, like, marketing has kind of taken the wheels, and big corporations have really twisted the way you see things, and there's a lot of fad words going around, and yeah, I've had a very unique introduction to coffee. I think obviously I know enough about coffee to start this podcast, but obviously I'm passionate about the topic, but I'm not precious about the topic. So it's not going to be a perfect run through of every single thing you need to know, but I'm hoping we can keep these concise enough that you can take something away, or even if it's just how you hear me talking about it changes the way you think about it. That's super great, and that's kind of my goal for this. I found coffee super randomly. A little bit about me. So I'm 22. I graduated high school, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life, that nagging feeling we all relate to. So after high school, I spent a year as an au pair, and I lived in Amsterdam for a year. And who let an 18-year-old out on the loose in Amsterdam is beyond me, but my parents were super cool. And I spent this crazy wild year there, and then I came home and had like a 180 flip where I got a job at a law firm in a super small town that I was raised, Elmer, Ontario, which was just like the opposite of everything I'd been doing. And I realized very quickly that the office setting was not something that I related to. It was not something I wanted to work towards. And my twin sister and I were kind of sitting in our bed late at night, just like thinking, what are we gonna do, sis? Where's this life gonna take us? And we were scrolling through Twitter, and Las Chicas Del Cafe put out a tweet of all things that they were hiring, and we both knew of Las Chicas, but we didn't really know. Again, it was one of those things where, like, yeah, coffee roastery, it's like a cafe maybe, like, why have we never seen it around London? Like, we were just kind of confused, but I like the idea of girls and coffee. So yeah, I put in a resume. I remember my dad drove me to the interview because I didn't even have a car yet. And we pull up, and it's in this old historic train station, super beautiful. Uh, and I remember walking in and throwing my hands in the air and being like, "It smells so good in here!" And I knew from that moment that they would have to do a lot to, pry me out of there. And that's when I met my mentor Maria, and she taught me so much about coffee. Her and her sister own the roastery, and their great grandfathers were coffee farmers. And so, they're fourth generation growers. They started out importing coffee, and then eventually they realized, people weren't treating the coffee the way it deserved to be treated. So they decided to open the roastery, and it's been open for 13 years, going strong. And it was just a very genuine, genuine feeling when you walk in, and we just vibed so well right away. I don't think it would matter what we were doing together. We just get along so well. So, it was kind of this interesting introduction to like, what the heck am I going to be doing here? And it was actually funny. I felt like this was a good omen going into it because the girl I was replacing had left to go back to Holland because she had been an au pair in Holland 6 years before me. So it's kind of this weird, like, what? I just got back from there and you're going there again to visit? And there were all these little things. Like me and my sisters, my family, I'm from a big family. I have 2 sisters and a brother, and my mom's a baker, so coffee was always one of those things in the background. We'd have this amazing meal, these big desserts, and there was always coffee kind of floating around. And both my sisters were baristas out of college, so there was always kind of this idea that we knew we wanted to open a cafe. Our house was kind of like an open door. There were always people flooding. We were always sharing meals. So we wanted to create that space one day. That was kind of our goal. We just, didn't know how to get there. Unfortunately, we made our sister take business. We were like, you got to figure that out. Well, we'll just work in the industry, get things going. And Shelby hated it and like hated our guts for making her do that. And, she's doing her own thing now. She's still a barista at amazing cafes. They've both been working at really cool places. So it's kind of funny. We look back now and we're like, 3 years ago, we had no idea that all 3 of us would be so deep in the coffee world. That's kind of how I got started in this wild, wild journey of mine. Now, I mentioned earlier that I'm a coffee roaster. I don't know if I said it or not. I'm a specialty coffee roaster, and I'm also a sensory roaster, which are 2 big mouthfuls, so I just want to explain what those are first. So to qualify as specialty coffee, it just means that coffee is graded 80 or above by the Specialty Coffee Association, which in terms of like commercial coffee, that's like really high quality coffee, and it's very hard to come by coffee like that. So when I first started, I would brag to people like, no, I'm roasting the best coffee you'll find around here, and everyone was like, yeah, you're saying that because you roasted it. That's not kind of biased, but it truly is some of the best, if not the best, coffee coming out of Nicaragua. And our growers work really hard. Like they've known Maria and Val their whole life, so they know that they're gonna put in the effort. They're gonna get paid fairly. That's a huge issue with coffee growers. So it's just kind of this whole teamwork, and everything I do, I could be doing an incredible job roasting, but if the care and effort wasn't put in at the farm level, then we're roasting with crap. Like, it doesn't matter what you do to that roast. It's the quality's not there to begin with. So that's what it means when I'm a specialty coffee roaster. So not to brag, I'm working with the best. And sensory coffee roaster just means that we don't use any technology or computer systems on the roasters, which you'll find, I don't want to say everywhere, but pretty much every other roastery uses this technology called Cropster, and it's really cool. Like, I give them credit for it, but it's just not the way we run things. But essentially, when you're roasting coffee, you're taking green beans and basically like baking them, roasting them to create the coffee that you know and love. And Cropster is kind of like every roaster has their recipes set out for their coffee, and Cropster is kind of this thing where you plug in, the time you want it to come out, the temperature, and it just like graphs the whole thing, and you kind of just watch the roaster do what the cropster tells it to do. Whereas I am smelling the coffee every 30 seconds. I'm evaluating the color and the aroma, and it's been really cool to see. We've tracked our logs to graph it out the way they would on a cropster, and you can get exactly the same graphs and they can taste differently. So that's kind of where we come in. We play things a bit differently. So it's kind of this intuitive and really intimate approach with coffee. So I really know those beans inside and out. And it's been kind of a fun sensory thing. Anybody who works in coffee often has a big interest in other culinary beverages and food, and just because your palate gets so sharp and you're just smelling things and recognizing tiny nuances throughout your day. So that's kind of where my approach has been different. I feel like I've had this whole foundation built before I even showed up, and they taught me things in a really simple way, and I think that's why I just get so surprised when people are so confused by coffee. And so I just want to try to explain things to you the way they were explained to me, and then we'll all come out of this together with something new. So episode 1, we're going to talk about what is coffee. Every episode, I kind of want to build up a little bit more information to give you, just so that we can kind of build up almost like a word bank. So we're going to slowly introduce everything, and you might know some of this stuff, you might not, but just so that if we refer back to it, you're not lost, because I think that's what happens a lot. You're like, wait, I'm missing a piece of the puzzle. I don't know what you're talking about there. So hopefully this will all kind of graduate and make sense to you in order. So we're going to start right at what is coffee. So coffee's a fruit. It grows on trees. They kind of look like little berries on a tree, and I think a lot of people forget that they're fruit and they need to be treated as fruit. And they kind of have all these nuances the way fruits do. Like there's all these different varietals, kind of like apples, but at the very top of it all, the mom and dad of coffees, really, there's Arabica and Robusta, and that's kind of probably what you see on all of the advertising. The difference between the two is that Robusta is all your commercial coffee and it's grown like corn. And so you might see how like the elevation is kind of important with coffee. And that just has to do with all the soils and everything enriching that bean. And Robusta is kind of just grown on flat land, huge fields of it. And coffee trees grow at different rates, and that's the beautiful part that I learned right at the beginning of my journey into coffee. With Arabica beans, they're grown on the side of the mountain in jungles. Like I had the opportunity to go to Nicaragua last year, and I could see the farms that we work with, and there's no path. There's no, you couldn't even bring a tractor up there if you tried. Everything's done by hand. So you have all these women, and they can't leave their kids. These are impoverished countries, so they have to usually bring their children with them, hiking up this into the jungle, and then you just see, there's a coffee tree. There's a bunch of coffee trees right there. They kind of just pop out in all these little random little sections in the jungle, and that's what's great about coffee. It's super sustainable that way, where it can grow on any side of the mountain and just work with that land. And these women go up and they'll check. The branches of the trees are really flexible, so you can kind of move them around, and it's almost kind of bushy the way they look, but you can move them around, and there's berries growing like pods all the way down the branches, and the women can look and see, okay, this one looks good, and this one maybe needs another week, and they're very patient with the whole process. And whereas with commercial coffee, with Robusta, they'll take a tractor through the field and just shake the trees and take whatever they can get. So you're getting ripe, not ripe, it's just beans. They aren't too picky about how ripe they all are. So that coffee, the Robusta coffee, has twice the caffeine, which is kind of the plus side for big companies, but it's so full of caffeine, and caffeine is so bitter, so that's what gives you that awful taste, let alone the fact that it's not ripe. And then you're mixing all these different varietals together just to get a bigger harvest. And because you're working with so many different varietals, you have to kind of burn that coffee. And so that's kind of what results in those, Maxwell tin, not to throw them under the bus, but, they're crappy because it's literally crappy coffee and they're just hiding all the crappiness about it. I couldn't speak worse about anything you buy in a tin, to be honest. But yeah, that's what makes that coffee different, and that's why you're paying more for better coffee, because it is better, and people have worked really hard, and it's a very personal. Every farmer has their own personal opinions about picking, and from us working with specialty coffee roast or growers, they've had generations of growers really perfecting how they're going to process and pick and deal with that coffee. And it's really an art. It takes a long time, and you can see farms with everything set up right, and they still just aren't coming out successfully. And it's just because it's those little bits of detail that really go a long way in the end. And you see it when you're roasting, you see it when you're drinking that cup. So, yeah, that's the difference between Arabica and Robusta. Now, some of you might come back at me and say, no, my tin of coffee said 100% Arabica. And that's because big corporations like to add like 2% Arabica in their tins, 98% Robusta, and then they'll be using 100% Arabica in that 2%, but it's only 2%. Do you see what I'm saying? Like they're just twisting the way you're perceiving that tin of coffee. So that's where the difference in those come in. So like I said, yeah, coffee's grown on trees. They're about 6 to 9 feet tall. Like they don't get very tall. They're kind of short enough for you to be able to reach them. So yeah, coffee goes through all these different periods throughout the year, and depending on which country you're picking coffee in, they kind of have different harvest times. So everything I deal with is from Nicaragua. It's from the same region in Nicaragua, so it's like I have all this condensed information about one spot in the world, but Costa Rican coffee acts a bit different and it tastes a bit different, and coffee all over the world has its own different intrinsic qualities. So it's not to say that the bourbon you're finding in Nicaragua is going to be the same as the bourbon you find in Costa Rica, but that's because, again, the elevations are different and the soil is different, and was it close to a volcano, was it not? All those little things affect the coffee in the end. So even weather, like global warming, I'm not going to get too crazy about this, but the amount of rain that we're having, if the trees get rain too early into the year and they start to bloom flowers, because it starts with these little white flowers that just cover the trees, it's so beautiful, and then the berries grow from there. So if they get rain too early and they start blooming, then that can really affect the end production of the cherries. If they bloomed and then it obviously wasn't ready, the weather wasn't agreeing with it, and then they weren't able to produce beans from that can really affect a small grower. And we buy from farms that are so small. We might get 6 bags from a grower, 1 bag from a different grower, and it's all these communities really working together, and they might all be processed in the same place, but this grower really picked and did all of this with just 1 bag, and that's all they could do. So that's kind of the unique thing with me as well, is we have all these single varietals of things, and we're really lucky to see that. I know a lot of roasters don't get the opportunity to work and identify and really get to know a specific bean the way I've been lucky enough to. So yeah, that's been really cool, and it's cool to see actually how small they are. And we went to some huge coffee farms to see, it's just crazy. It's the whole world knows about coffee, but I just feel like so much information gets lost, and yeah, it's just one of those things. Everybody knows about coffee, but the amount of people who come into the roastery and see the coffee trees and they're like, wait, what? It's a fruit? I didn't even know that. It's like, it's base level, the information about coffee. And it ages like fruit. And some of the beans, if they're kept in those cherries, they're inherently so sweet, and it tastes like literally like you're baking an apple pie inside the roaster. Just like the ripeness of that fruit that was kept inside those cherries is just really, really cool. So I hope this made sense. I hope I didn't go in too many circles. It's a rough habit of mine. Yeah, I hope you learned something new about this. The next episode, we're going to go into, I don't even remember. We're going to move on. We're going to probably talk about what a roastery is, what a cupping is, kind of get into the depths of the fun things that I get to do at work. So thank you for listening to the first episode. This episode was produced and edited by my friend Jacob Anstey, and he also did the original intro and outro music. You can find us on Instagram. You can find me on Instagram at HelmRach. You can find Afternoon Bloom on Instagram at Afternoon Bloom. And you can find Jacob at Jacob _ no, that's wrong. It's Jean _ daddy. So yeah, we'll see you next time. Thank you.